This is the greatest love story ever told. The oil stain on Lily Maeve's left thumb would not come clean, no matter how hard she had scrubbed it that morning. Now, standing in the vast morning room of Somerset Hall, surrounded by walls paneled in honey-colored oak and furniture that cost more than her family would earn in a lifetime, that dark smudge felt like a brand. She was acutely aware of the way her simple gray gown, her best, though patched at the elbows, stood in stark contrast to the opulence around her. The Persian rug beneath her worn boots was softer than her own bed. She had been summoned for needlework, or so the curt letter had claimed. A commission large enough to lift her siblings out of the cramped, damp room they shared above the milliner's shop. Large enough to mean food that wasn't mostly broth. Large enough to finally matter. But the man standing before her did not look like someone concerned with embroidery. Duke Gareth Shaw was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 35, with dark hair touched silver at the temples and eyes the color of a winter sea. Handsome, certainly, though his face carried a weariness that made him seem carved from stone rather than flesh. In his arms, he cradled a small white dog, a Maltese with eyes like polished jet. The dog watched her with an unnerving stillness, as if it too understood the gravity of whatever was about to unfold. "Miss Maeve," the Duke said, his voice low and measured. "I did not summon you to mend a hem." Lily's heart sank. The promised fee evaporated in her mind like morning mist. He crossed to the window, still holding the dog with a tenderness that seemed at odds with his cold demeanor. "I have 6 months left to live. The physicians have been quite clear on that point." He stroked the dog's head. "And Baron here, he suffers from a parallel ailment. Untreatable. The veterinarian gives him the same timeline." The words hung in the air like smoke. Lily found she could not speak. Gareth turned to face her fully. "I require not a seamstress, Miss Maeve, but something far stranger. An archivist of the soul, if you will. Someone to help me execute a calendar of deeds, specific acts I must complete before the end. For my estate, for Baron, for myself." He paused, studying her with an intensity that made her want to step back. "Your payment will be substantial, enough to transform your circumstances entirely. But you must keep this arrangement and the countdown itself an absolute secret." Lily's mind raced. 6 months. A dying Duke and his dying dog. A bizarre task she did not fully understand. But her youngest sister's cough echoed in her memory. The landlord's threats. The gnawing, endless hunger. "I accept," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "When do we begin?" "My lovely family, you know I care about you all. But before we continue with Lily and Gareth's heartbreaking journey, I need to ask you something. If you believe that love stories, even the ones that end too soon, deserve to be remembered and shared, then please hit that subscribe button right now. Like and share this video, because if we don't share these tales of impossible love and extraordinary sacrifice, they disappear just like the people in them. Don't let this story vanish unwatched. Subscribe so you never miss a story that might change how you see love and loss. Now, let's see what happens when Lily enters a world she was never meant to belong to. The quarters assigned to Lily were in the servants' wing, tucked at the end of a narrow corridor that smelled of beeswax and lavender. The room itself was larger than the entire space her family shared in town. A small bed with a quilted coverlet, a washstand with an actual mirror, a writing desk positioned beneath a window that overlooked the estate's eastern gardens. By her standards, it was palatial. By Somerset Hall's standards, it announced precisely what she was: hired help, kept at a careful distance from the family apartments above. Yet her work, as the Duke made immediately clear, would take place entirely in his presence. The contract was presented to her that same afternoon in the library. A cavernous room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes that gleamed in the firelight. Gareth's solicitor, a thin man with spectacles that magnified his watery eyes, laid the document before her on the massive mahogany desk. The paper was heavy, expensive, covered in dense legal script that might as well have been a foreign language. "The terms are thus," the solicitor intoned. "Upon successful completion of the calendar of deeds as specified by His Grace, you will receive the sum of £500. Lily's breath caught. £500. It was a fortune. A life-changing, impossible fortune. Payment to be rendered in full upon the conclusion of the 6th month, provided all tasks are executed to His Grace's satisfaction," the solicitor continued. "You will maintain absolute discretion regarding the nature of this arrangement, the timeline disclosed to you, and any private matters you may witness. Breach of confidentiality will result in immediate termination without compensation and potential legal action for damages." Gareth stood by the window, his back to them both, one hand resting on the sill. Baron sat at his feet, a small white sentinel. "Do you understand the terms, Miss Maeve?" the solicitor asked. "I do," Lily said, though her hand trembled slightly as she accepted the pen. Her signature looked small and childish next to the elaborate flourishes of the legal script. But it was done. She was bound now by law and by need to see this strange arrangement through to its end. The solicitor departed with a curt bow, leaving her alone with the Duke. Gareth turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "We should establish the parameters of our working relationship," he said, his tone formal, as if addressing a clerk. "You will attend me each morning at 9 o'clock in whichever room I designate. I will provide you with the details of each deed as we approach it. Some will require preparation, others will be spontaneous. You are to document each act in the journal I will provide, with both written description and, where appropriate, sketches or mementos." Lily nodded, clasping her hands before her to still their shaking. "You will take your meals in the servants' hall unless a particular deed requires your presence at table. You will not discuss this arrangement with the staff, nor will you speculate about my health or timeline. Should anyone inquire about your purpose here, you are to say only that you have been engaged for archival work related to the estate's history." "Yes, Your Grace." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is a professional arrangement, Miss Maeve. I expect professionalism. There will be no sentiment, no familiarity beyond what is strictly necessary for the completion of our work. Is that understood?" The coldness in his voice was like a physical barrier between them. Lily had known grief, had seen it hollow out her father after her mother's death. But this was different. This was grief wielded like armor, hardened into something impenetrable. "Perfectly understood, Your Grace," she said quietly. "Good." He moved to the desk and retrieved a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with a simple pattern of leaves. "This is yours. Guard it carefully. We begin tomorrow." He dismissed her with a slight nod, already turning his attention to the papers on his desk. Lily took the journal and retreated, feeling the weight of the 6-month countdown settle onto her shoulders like a yoke. That night, alone in her small room, she opened the journal to its first blank page. The paper was cream-colored, thick and smooth beneath her fingertips. She had never owned anything so fine. For a long moment, She simply sat there, pen poised, unsure what to write. A record of deeds not yet done, a chronicle of a death foretold. A soft scratching at her door made her look up. When she opened it, Baron stood in the hallway, his feathered tail wagging slowly. He looked up at her with those bright, knowing eyes, then simply walked past her into the room, as if he had every right to be there.
"Baron,"
Lily whispered, glancing down the empty corridor. "You shouldn't be here. His Grace will." But the little dog had already claimed the small rug beside her bed, turning 3 precise circles before settling with a contented sigh. He rested his chin on his paws and watched her expectantly. Lily closed the door quietly and returned to her desk. "You're going to get me dismissed on my first day," she murmured. But there was no real reproach in her voice. The room had felt too large, too empty. Now, with Baron's steady breathing filling the silence, it felt almost like home. She dipped her pen in ink and began to write. Day 1. The contract is signed. The Duke has made his expectations clear. This is to be a professional arrangement, nothing more. 6 months to document a life's final deeds. 6 months until... She could not bring herself to write the words. Instead, she drew a small sketch in the margin. A white dog with eyes too wise for his small body, already breaking the rules his master had set. Baron sighed in his sleep, a sound of perfect peace. Lily allowed herself the smallest of smiles and continued writing into the night. The first deed came on the 3rd morning, delivered with the same clinical detachment Gareth applied to everything. "Thomas Welby," he said, standing at the window of his study as autumn rain streaked the glass. "He was my father's groundskeeper for 40 years. Retired now, living in the cottage past the North Woods. He has debts, medical expenses for his wife before she passed last winter. Approximately £60 owed to various creditors in the village." Lily looked up from the journal where she'd been sketching the view from the study window. "You wish to pay them?" "I wish for you to pay them," Gareth corrected. "Anonymously. He's a proud man. He would refuse charity, especially from the estate." He crossed to his desk and retrieved a leather purse heavy with coin. "Go to each creditor personally. Tell them an anonymous benefactor has settled the accounts. Do not reveal my involvement under any circumstances." Lily took the purse, feeling the weight of it. More money than she'd held in her entire life, and she was simply to give it away to strangers. "And Mr. Welby, shall I tell him his debts are cleared?" "No. Let him discover it naturally when next he goes to town." Something flickered across Gareth's face, too quick to name. "Document the transactions, the names, the amounts, that is all." She spent the day traveling between the village shops in the estate carriage, feeling absurdly grand and entirely out of place. The baker, the apothecary, the doctor, the coal merchant, each received their payment with varying degrees of surprise and suspicion. The doctor, an elderly man with kind eyes, studied her for a long moment. "Someone's looking after old Tom, then," he said quietly. "That's good. That's very good." Lily wrote it all down that evening, the amounts, the transactions, the doctor's words. But what she couldn't capture in ink was the strange, somber satisfaction she'd glimpsed in Gareth's eyes when she reported the deed complete. This wasn't generosity born of excess. This was something else entirely. Something that tasted of atonement. The second deed came a week later and proved far more complicated. Gareth led her to the village himself, Baron trotting at his heels despite the light rain. They stopped at a cramped cottage where a washerwoman lived with her 3 children. The youngest, a girl of perhaps 5 with tangled brown hair, clutched a rag doll so worn that its features had nearly disappeared. "Her name is Emma," Gareth said quietly as they stood outside. "The doll was made by her grandmother, who died last month. It's falling apart." Lily glanced at him, confused. "You want me to mend it?" "I want you to restore it. Make it whole again." His voice was rough. "Use whatever materials you need. Spare no expense. But make it as it was, as she remembers it." The work took 3 days. Lily sat in Emma's small kitchen while the child watched with enormous eyes, carefully reconstructing the doll's body with new muslin, re-embroidering a face that matched the faded remnants of the original, sewing a tiny dress from scraps of calico that she dyed to match the old fabric's pattern. The mother wept when Lily presented it, restored and whole. Emma clutched it to her chest and smiled for the first time since her grandmother's passing. Gareth had waited outside each day, standing in the autumn cold with Baron, never entering the cottage. When Lily emerged on the 3rd day, he simply looked at her, a question in his eyes. "It's done," she said. It brought her joy." He nodded once, sharply, and turned away. But not before Lily saw the tightness in his jaw, the rigid set of his shoulders. This wasn't about the child's happiness, she realized. Or rather, it was. But it was also about something he was trying desperately to repair in himself. Each deed was a small patch on a wound too large to heal. These weren't wishes. They were penances. That evening, as she sat documenting the doll's restoration with careful sketches, Baron asleep as usual on her rug, a commotion echoed through the hall below. Raised voices, the sound of boots on marble, the flurried anxiety of servants unprepared for an arrival. By morning, she understood why. Lord Alistair Shaw arrived at breakfast like a cold front, all sharp angles and sharper words. He was perhaps 40, handsome in a severe way, with Gareth's dark coloring but none of his depth. His eyes, when the butler introduced Lily in the morning room, were pale and calculating. "And who is this?" he asked, his gaze traveling over her simple dress with unconcealed disdain. "Miss Maeve is assisting with the state archives," Gareth said evenly. He sat at the desk, Baron in his lap, projecting an image of casual authority. But Lily could see the tension in his hands. "Archives?" Alistair drew out the word as if tasting it for poison. "How peculiar. I wasn't aware we required archival assistance. Surely the estate steward, the steward manages current affairs. Miss Maeve is documenting historical matters at my request." "Historical matters?" Alistair's smile didn't reach his eyes. He turned to Lily fully. "And what qualifies you for such work, Miss Maeve? You have the look of a tradesperson about you." The insult landed precisely as intended. Lily felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "I have skills in documentation and illustration, my lord." His Grace felt they suited the project. "I'm sure he did." Alistair's tone suggested something entirely inappropriate. He turned back to Gareth. "Cousin, might I have a word? In private?" Gareth set Baron down carefully. "Miss Maeve, you're dismissed for the morning. Continue your work after luncheon." She curtsied and withdrew, but not before catching Alistair's eyes on her again. Cold, suspicious, measuring. He looked at her the way one might look at a rat in the pantry, calculating how best to set the trap. In the hallway, she pressed her back against the wall, heart racing. The contract's confidentiality clause suddenly felt less like protection and more like a noose. What would Alistair do if he discovered the truth, that his cousin was dying? That a common seamstress was being paid a fortune for services he couldn't begin to understand? Through the heavy door, she heard Alistair's voice rise in anger, though she couldn't make out the words. Baron appeared at the end of the corridor, having apparently escaped through a servant's entrance. He trotted to her side and sat, leaning against her skirts. Lily reached down to stroke his soft head, her hands trembling slightly. "Your master has enemies, even in his own family," she whispered. Baron looked up at her with those knowing eyes and whined softly, as if he understood perfectly. The countdown, Lily realized, wasn't just against death. It was against discovery. The collapse came without warning on a gray morning in late October, 6 weeks into their arrangement. Lily arrived at the study at the appointed hour to find the door ajar, and Gareth slumped in his chair, his face ashen, one hand pressed to his chest. Baron stood on the desk before him, whining urgently, pawing at his master's sleeve. "Your Grace!" Lily dropped the journal and rushed forward, her heart hammering. "Should I call for the doctor?" "No." The word came out harsh, breathless. "No, doctor. It will pass." "But you can barely—" "It will pass." He gripped the chair arms, knuckles white. "Help me to the settee, please." She hesitated only a moment before sliding her arm beneath his, taking his weight as he stood. He was taller than she'd realized, and the solidity of him against her side sent an unexpected jolt through her senses. She could feel his heart racing, the tremor in his muscles as they crossed the room. He smelled of sandalwood and something medicinal, bitter beneath the surface. He sank onto the settee with a suppressed groan. Baron immediately leaped up beside him, curling against his ribs. "The blue bottle," Gareth managed, gesturing weakly toward his desk. "Drawer on the left." Lily found it, a small cobalt bottle with a handwritten label in Latin she couldn't read. She brought it with a glass of water, watching as he swallowed the medicine with shaking hands. Then she did the only thing that made sense. She sat beside him, one hand resting lightly on Baron's back, and waited. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire and Gareth's gradually steadying breath. Minutes passed. Color slowly returned to his face. "This will happen more frequently," he said finally, his voice rough. "As we approach the end, you should be prepared." "How often does it happen now?" 2 or 3 times a week. "The medicine helps?" "Sometimes." He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the settee. In the firelight, she could see the fine lines of pain bracketing his mouth, the shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "You weren't hired to be a nurse." "I was hired to help you complete your deeds," Lily said quietly. "I can hardly do that if you're alone and unconscious on the floor." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something softer than his usual severity. Practical, as always. They sat together until his breathing returned to normal, until the tremor left his hands. It was the longest they'd been in each other's presence without the buffer of a task between them. And Lily found herself acutely aware of the warmth of his shoulder near hers, the way Baron formed a bridge between their bodies, connecting them. When Gareth finally rose, he was steadier, but something had shifted. The wall between them had developed a crack. The next day, searching for spare parchment in the library as Gareth had instructed, Lily discovered the portrait quite by accident. It had been turned to face the wall, hidden behind a globe and several stacks of ledgers on a high shelf. She wouldn't have noticed it at all, except that Baron had followed her into the library and began whining at that particular shelf with unusual insistence. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, moving the globe aside. The portrait was small, intimate, clearly meant for private display rather than a formal gallery. It showed a young woman, perhaps 25, with gentle eyes and dark hair arranged in soft curls. She wore a pale blue dress and held an infant in her arms, a baby in christening robes, its tiny face peaceful in sleep. The woman's smile was radiant, full of uncomplicated joy. Lily's breath caught. She knew that look. She'd seen it on her own mother's face in the single daguerreotype her family possessed, taken when her youngest sister was born. This was love. This was family. This was everything Gareth had lost. You shouldn't have found that. She spun to find Gareth in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Baron whined again, looking between them anxiously. "I'm sorry. I was only looking for parchment, and Baron." "My wife, Catherine." His voice was flat, factual, as if reciting from a ledger. "And our daughter, Anne. They died 4 years ago. A carriage accident on the estate road during a storm. Catherine was bringing Anne back from the village. The axle broke. They went into the river." The words fell like stones into still water, each one creating ripples of horror. Lily clutched the portrait, unable to speak. "I should have had the bridge repaired months earlier," Gareth continued, still in that terrible, emotionless tone. "The estate manager had warned me. But I was in London, attending to matters I thought more important. Politics, social obligations, things that mattered not at all." He paused. "I received the news at a ball. I was dancing when they died." "Your Grace," Lily whispered. "I'm so sorry." "This month's deed," he said, as if she hadn't spoken, "requires us to visit the chapel on the North Road. It's been abandoned since the accident. I haven't been able to. I need to go there, before the end. And I need you to witness it." They rode out 3 days later in a small carriage, Baron on the seat between them. The chapel stood alone on a hillside, its stone walls covered in ivy, its windows dark and empty. The river ran nearby, swollen with autumn rain, singing its endless, indifferent song. Gareth stood before the chapel doors for a long moment before pushing them open. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of damp stone and rotting wood. Light filtered through the broken windows in pale shafts. The pews were thick with dust. He walked to the front and simply stood there, staring at the altar where his wife and child must have been meant to be christened, or perhaps married, or remembered. His shoulders began to shake. Lily had documented tears before, the washerwoman's grief, old Thomas Welby's relief when he discovered his debts forgiven and had come to the estate to learn who'd helped him. But this was different. This was a man breaking apart after years of holding himself together through sheer will. She set down her journal and crossed to him, placing one hand gently on his arm. "They would forgive you," she said softly. "If they loved you, they would forgive you." "I cannot forgive myself." His voice cracked. "Every deed I ask you to complete, they're all attempts to balance the ledger, to do the things I should have done when it mattered. But it's too late. It will always be too late. It's not too late to honor them, to live the months you have left in a way that would make them proud." She tightened her grip on his arm. "That's what these deeds are, aren't they? Not penance. Love. Continuing to love them by loving the world they left behind." He turned to her then, and the anguish in his eyes was so raw, so utterly undefended, that it stole her breath. Without thinking, operating purely on instinct and compassion, Lily stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him. For a heartbeat, he stood rigid. Then he collapsed into her embrace, his arms coming around her, his face pressed against her shoulder as the sobs finally, fully broke free. She held him while he wept for his wife, his daughter, the life he'd lost, and the death he faced. Baron pressed against their legs, whining softly. When the storm finally passed, Gareth pulled back, not quite meeting her eyes. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "That was inappropriate of me." "It was human," Lily corrected gently. "You're still allowed to be human, Your Grace. Even now, especially now." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. A dawning recognition, perhaps, or a question he wasn't yet ready to ask. They documented the visit in silence, Lily sketching the chapel while Gareth stood at the window. But the wall between them, already cracked, had begun to crumble in earnest. The intimacy, as he'd warned from the beginning, had become unavoidable. The confessions began small, almost accidentally, in the quiet moments between deeds. They were in the conservatory on a cold November afternoon, Lily sketching the winter roses Gareth had ordered planted in Catherine's memory, when he spoke without preamble. "I acquired Baron 3 years ago," he said, pruning shears idle in his hands. "After Catherine and Anne. The house was too quiet. I couldn't bear it. The silence where there had been laughter, footsteps, life." He glanced at the small white dog dozing in a patch of pale sunlight. "The breeder said Maltese were companion animals, bred for comfort. I thought it foolish, purchasing a dog as if it could fill such a void." Lily looked up from her sketch, saying nothing, letting the silence invite him to continue. But he did, in his way. Not fill it. Nothing could do that. But he made the emptiness more bearable. Gareth's voice softened. "He would sit with me in the evenings, when the memories were worst. Never demanding, never judging, just present, alive. A small warm creature who needed me when I thought I had nothing left to give." "And now you're losing him too," Lily said quietly. "Yes." The single word carried the weight of oceans. The veterinarian said it was remarkable, almost unprecedented, for the timeline to align so precisely with my own, as if Baron decided we would leave together. He set down the shears, his hands trembling slightly. "I know it's absurd to ascribe such intention to an animal, but I cannot shake the feeling that he's staying for me, that he's holding on because he knows I cannot face it alone." Lily's throat tightened. She looked at Baron, sleeping so peacefully, and wondered if love could indeed be that powerful, that loyal, even in a creature so small. "You're not alone anymore," she said before she could stop herself. Gareth's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the truth they'd both been carefully avoiding. She was no longer merely an employee. He was no longer merely her patron. Somewhere in the deeds and the confessions and the shared silences, they had become something else entirely. The next day, Lily found herself telling him about her father. They were reviewing the ledger of completed deeds in the study, Baron sprawled across both their laps in shameless defiance of propriety. When Gareth asked about the oil stain that still marked her thumb, "My father was a barrel maker," she said, unconsciously rubbing the stain. "He taught me to work with my hands, to take pride in craft. He said anything made with care and attention carried a piece of your soul in it." She smiled at the memory. He would spend hours on a single barrel, making certain every stave was perfect, every band secure. He said his barrels would outlive him, and so they needed to be worthy of that immortality. "Did they?" Gareth asked. "Outlive him?" I don't know. He died when I was 16. After my mother passed, he simply faded, like a lamp slowly running out of oil. She stroked Baron's soft fur, finding comfort in the simple action. My siblings and I tried to keep his shop running, but we were too young, too unskilled. We lost it within a year. That's when I became a seamstress. It was the only trade I could learn quickly enough to keep us from starving. You raised them yourself? There was no one else. Margaret is 18 now, Thomas 16, and little Beatrice just 14. Her voice warmed with fierce affection. They're why I'm here, why I accepted your offer. The money you're paying me will give them choices I never had. Margaret can marry for love instead of necessity. Thomas can apprentice to a real tradesman. Beatrice can attend a proper school. Gareth was quiet for a long moment. You speak of sacrifice as if it were simply duty. Isn't it? No. Duty is obligation. What you describe is devotion. He hesitated, then added softly, Catherine used to say the same thing, that love without action was merely sentiment. She would have liked you, I think. The compliment settled over Lily like a benediction. To be compared to the woman in the portrait, the woman who had owned this man's heart so completely, it felt both precious and dangerous. That evening, as dusk settled over Somerset Hall, a footman arrived at Lily's quarters with an unusual message. His Grace requested her presence in the drawing room, not the study, not the library. The drawing room, where family gathered, where social calls were received. She changed into her best dress, still simple, still patched, but clean and carefully pressed, and made her way through the candlelit corridors with her heart beating in uncertain rhythm. Gareth stood by the pianoforte, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him. His cravat loosened, his dark jacket exchanged for a smoking jacket of deep burgundy. Baron sat at his feet, tail wagging at her arrival. Miss Maeve, he said, and there was something almost nervous in his formality. I realized that in all our weeks together, we have never simply talked. Without the weight of a deed or documentation between us, I thought perhaps this evening we might remedy that. A small table had been set with tea and biscuits. Not a grand spread, but intimate, meant for two. They talked as the candles burned low, conversation flowing with unexpected ease. Gareth spoke of his childhood, of learning to manage the estate, of the weight of a title inherited too young. Lily shared stories of her siblings' antics, of the cramped warmth of their tiny flat, of the unexpected beauty she found in simple things. The way morning light caught in a spider's web, the satisfaction of a perfectly executed stitch. I haven't laughed in 4 years, Gareth said suddenly, after Lily recounted Beatrice's attempt to dye a dress and turning everything in the wash basin purple, including herself. I'd forgotten what it felt like. Laughter isn't a betrayal, Lily said gently. Joy doesn't diminish grief. It just reminds us that we're still alive. For a little while longer, at least. The words should have been bitter, but instead they were almost peaceful. He stood, crossing to the pianoforte. Do you dance, Miss Maeve? Not formally. We danced at harvest festivals sometimes, country dances. Then you know the important part, moving to music. He opened the pianoforte and began to play, not a grand waltz, but something simpler, a melody that sounded old and sweet and slightly melancholy. He rose from the bench and offered his hand. Lily took it, her calloused fingers sliding against his, and let him draw her into the open space before the fire. There was no grand ballroom sweep to their movement, no practiced elegance, just two people swaying gently to music that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the instrument, guided by a rhythm that had nothing to do with formal steps. Gareth's hand rested at her waist. Hers touched his shoulder. The space between them was proper, correct, yet charged with an electricity that made her breath shallow. "Lily," he said, and the use of her given name sent a shiver through her. "I need to tell you something." She looked up, finding his face closer than she'd realized, his winter sea eyes locked on hers. "These weeks with you have been—" He paused, searching for words. "I expected to simply endure the remaining months, to complete my tasks and fade quietly. But you've made me want to live them, truly live them, not merely survive. And I don't know if I should thank you for that gift or apologize for the cruelty of it." "Why cruelty?" she whispered. "Because now I have something to lose again. Someone to—" He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "This is unfair to you. You came here for employment, not for this." The music from the pianoforte continued its ghostly melody, though his hands were no longer on the keys. Perhaps Baron had learned to play, Lily thought with borderline hysteria. Or perhaps the house itself was conspiring to make this moment impossibly perfect and impossibly doomed. "What if I want this too?" The words escaped before wisdom could catch them. "What if I stopped seeing this as employment weeks ago?" His hand tightened at her waist. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her with an intensity that frightened her. Instead, he pressed his forehead to hers, eyes closed, breathing unsteady. "We have 2 months left," he said hoarsely. "Perhaps less. I have no right to ask you to care for a dying man." "You're not asking," Lily said. "I already do." They stood there, swaying gently, not quite dancing and not quite embracing, existing in the fragile space between what was and what could never be. Baron watched from his place by the fire, and somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 10. The wall between them hadn't just cracked, it had shattered entirely, and neither of them had the strength to rebuild it. Lord Alistair returned to Somerset Hall on a bitter December morning, arriving unannounced in a carriage that scattered gravel like grape shot. Lily was in the study with Gareth, reviewing sketches of the village school they'd helped fund, the previous week's deed, when the commotion in the entrance hall reached them. "My lord," the butler's voice carried up the stairs, strained with diplomatic panic. "If you had sent word, we would have prepared." "I don't require preparation, Matthews. I require my cousin. Where is he?" Gareth's jaw tightened. He'd been smiling a moment before, genuinely pleased with Lily's rendering of the school children receiving their new slates and primers. Now the warmth drained from his face, replaced by the cold mask he'd worn constantly in their early weeks together. "You should go," he said quietly to Lily. "But the documentation, now, please." She gathered her materials quickly, slipping out through the side door just as Alistair's footsteps echoed in the corridor. She caught a glimpse of him, his pale eyes sharp, his expression carrying the righteous anger of someone who believed he'd uncovered a conspiracy. Lily retreated to her quarters, Baron following at her heels. The little dog had become her shadow in recent weeks, seemingly understanding that he belonged as much to her now as to Gareth. She tried to focus on transferring her sketches to the master journal, but the raised voices filtering up through the floor made concentration impossible. An hour passed, then 2. The argument continued, sometimes loud enough for individual words to pierce through. Improper, reputation, inheritance, dignity of the title. When the knock finally came at her door, Lily knew it wouldn't be good news. But she didn't expect it to be Alistair himself. He stood in her doorway, filling the frame with an aggressive casualness that immediately set her on edge. His gaze swept over her modest quarters with barely concealed disdain. "Miss Maeve, how cozy you've made yourself here." Lily rose from her desk, keeping her voice level. "Lord Alistair, I wasn't aware you required my presence." "Oh, I think we're well past the point of pretense, don't you?" He stepped inside without invitation, forcing her to back away. Baron growled low in his throat, a sound Lily had never heard from the gentle creature. "I've just had a most illuminating conversation with my cousin. He remains frustratingly vague about the exact nature of your archival work. His Grace hired me to document estate history. The work is detailed and ongoing." "Estate history?" Alistair's smile was a blade. "How fascinating. And yet the staff tells me you spend every day closeted with Gareth. You take meals together. You travel together to the village. You were even seen dancing together in the drawing room last week." He paused, letting the implications settle like poison. That seems rather intimate work for an archivist. Heat flooded Lily's cheeks. "My work requires His Grace's input and guidance. As for the rest, I'm sure the staff misunderstood. The staff understands perfectly well what they saw. A common seamstress, oh yes, I had you investigated. Miss Maeve, a common seamstress from the slums, installed in a duke's household, given unprecedented access to a grieving, vulnerable man." His voice dropped, became almost conversational. "Tell me, what exactly are you after? A generous bequest? Perhaps marriage, if you can trap him before the scandal becomes too loud to ignore?" "How dare you? How dare I?" Alistair laughed, the sound cold and mirthless. "I dare because I have a responsibility to the Somerset title, to the estate, to the family legacy. Gareth is not himself. He hasn't been since Catherine's death. He's susceptible to manipulation, to pretty words from a pretty face. It's my duty to protect him from opportunists." Lily's hands clenched into fists. "I am not an opportunist. His Grace hired me for legitimate work, which I have performed with complete professionalism." "Professionalism?" He drew out the word mockingly. "Is that what you call spending hours alone with him daily? Accepting his gifts? Don't deny it. I've seen the new dresses in your wardrobe, the books, the writing materials, all far beyond what any servant would receive. Those are tools for my work. Your work." Alistair moved closer, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. "Let me tell you what I think your work really is, Miss Maeve. I think you've recognized a dying man's vulnerability and decided to exploit it. I think you're playing the role of companion, confidant, perhaps more, in hopes of securing your future at the expense of the Somerset inheritance." The accusation was so unjust, so deliberately cruel, that for a moment Lily couldn't find words. Baron's growling intensified, and she placed a calming hand on his head. "You know nothing about me or my work here," she managed. "Don't I?" Alistair reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "Lily Maeve, daughter of a failed barrel maker, currently responsible for 3 younger siblings living in squalor above a milliner's shop in town. Rent 3 months in arrears, outstanding debts to the grocer, the coal merchant, and the landlord, totaling approximately £40. He looked up from the paper with false sympathy. Desperate circumstances for a desperate woman. How convenient that my cousin appeared with an offer of employment at precisely the right moment. Terror sliced through her. He'd investigated not just her, but her family, which meant he knew exactly where to strike to cause the most damage. My family has nothing to do with this. On the contrary, they have everything to do with it. Alistair refolded the paper with deliberate care. Here's what's going to happen, Miss Maeve. You're going to complete whatever little project Gareth has assigned you, accept your payment, and leave Somerset Hall. You will not attempt to secure additional compensation. You will not pursue any further relationship with my cousin. And you will certainly not appear in any will or bequest. And if I refuse? His smile widened. Then I'll be forced to make certain inquiries in town. About your family's debts, their character, their circumstances. I have considerable influence with the landlords and merchants. It would be a shame if your siblings found themselves without housing, without credit, perhaps even facing charges of fraud or theft. These things can be arranged so easily when the right pressure is applied. The threat landed like a physical blow. Lily's breath caught. You would destroy innocent people too. I would protect my family's legacy from a scheming fortune hunter, Alistair corrected. What happens to your family is entirely dependent on your choices, Miss Maeve. Choose wisely. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back with calculated cruelty. Oh, and one more thing. Gareth's health is failing, isn't it? I've seen the signs, the pallor, the tremors, the medicine bottles poorly hidden. If he's as ill as I suspect, he's hardly in a position to make sound decisions about his estate or his associations. Should I need to, I can petition to have his affairs placed under my management for his own protection. Imagine how that would complicate your little arrangement. Get out, Lily said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. Alistair offered a mocking bow. A pleasure, Miss Maeve. I do hope we understand each other. He left, his footsteps receding down the corridor with unhurried confidence. Lily stood frozen, her heart hammering. Baron pressed anxiously against her legs. Everything Alistair threatened was possible. More than possible. Probable. She'd seen how easily the powerful could crush the vulnerable. One word from him and her siblings would be on the street, facing worse than poverty, facing ruin. The smart choice, the safe choice, was to do exactly as he demanded. Complete the work, take the payment, disappear. But the thought of abandoning Gareth now, with less than 2 months remaining, with the deeds only half finished and his heart finally beginning to heal, it was unthinkable. Worse than unthinkable. It was a betrayal of everything that had grown between them. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She opened the door to find Gareth, his face drawn with concern. What did he say to you? He demanded. I saw him leave your quarters. Lily, what did he threaten? She looked at him. This man who'd lost everything, and was losing even the time he had left. Who'd somehow found it in himself to care again, despite knowing the cost. The man she'd fallen in love with somewhere between the deeds and the confessions and the dancing. Nothing I can't handle, she lied. Don't. His hand found hers. Don't protect me from this. Whatever he said, we'll face it together. He thinks I'm manipulating you, that I'm after your money or your name. I'll speak with him. Make it clear. No. The word came out fiercer than she intended. He won't listen to you. He thinks you're not in your right mind, that your illness makes you vulnerable to influence. She squeezed his hand, but he's wrong. About all of it. And I'm not leaving. Lily, if he's threatened you or your family, I'm not leaving, she repeated, and felt the truth of it settle in her bones. We have work to finish, deeds to complete, and I will not let him or anyone else stop us. Gareth pulled her close, his arms coming around her in an embrace that was both desperate and protective. You're risking everything. So are you, she whispered against his chest. every time you let yourself care again, knowing how it ends. We're both risking everything. Then we'll risk it together. Baron pressed between them, whining softly. And somewhere in the house, a clock began to chime. Time passing, slipping away, counting down to an ending they could no longer pretend wasn't coming. But they would face it together, Lily decided. Whatever Alistair threatened, whatever consequences came, she would not abandon this man to die alone. Some things were worth more than safety. Some things were worth everything. December deepened into the kind of cold that made even the great fireplaces of Somerset Hall seem insufficient. But Lily hardly noticed. The warmth she felt had nothing to do with flames, and everything to do with the way Gareth now reached for her hand when they walked through the portrait gallery. The way he saved her a seat beside him at his desk. The way he said her name, simply Lily, as if it were a prayer and a promise at once. They were careful. The servants surely suspected. But they maintained a veneer of propriety in public spaces. Yet behind closed doors, in the study or the library, or the conservatory where Baron dozed in winter sunlight, they allowed themselves the luxury of truth. Gareth would read to her while she sketched, his voice washing over her like music. She would absently run her fingers through his hair when he laid his head in her lap during his increasingly frequent moments of weakness. They stole kisses in shadowed corridors, brief and sweet and tinged with desperation. Every touch carried the weight of its own impermanence. "We're living in stolen time," Gareth said one evening as they sat before the fire in his private sitting room. Baron sprawled across both their laps in shameless contentment. "Every moment feels like both a gift and a theft." "Then we'll be thieves together," Lily replied, lacing her fingers through his. "And treasure what we steal." His health was declining more noticeably now. The medicine bottles multiplied on his desk. Some mornings he couldn't rise before 10, but on his good days, he burned with a fierce vitality, as if determined to live a lifetime in the weeks remaining. The next deed, he announced, would be his grandest yet. "I want to host a ball," he said, his eyes alight with something Lily hadn't seen before, not just determination, but joy. "Not for society, not for the gentry who've whispered about my isolation for 4 years. For the people who actually matter. The estate staff, the tenant farmers, the villagers who've worked this land for generations. A proper celebration in the great hall, with music and dancing and a feast. One night of beauty and abundance for people who rarely receive either." "That's a considerable undertaking," Lily said carefully. "Are you certain you have the strength?" "I have enough strength for this." He took her hands. "And I want you there. Not as my archivist or my employee, as my guest, my partner in this final deed." The preparations consumed 2 weeks. Gareth, despite his declining health, threw himself into the planning with an energy that worried and thrilled Lily in equal measure. He consulted with the cook on the menu, ordered new livery for the footmen, hired musicians from town. Lily helped design the decorations, garlands of evergreen and holly, candles in every window, ribbons in deep crimson and gold. She also made herself a dress. It was an act of defiance and hope combined, stitched late into the night by candlelight in her quarters. She used fabric Gareth had insisted on ordering, deep blue silk the color of midnight, with delicate silver embroidery at the bodice and sleeves. It was the finest thing she'd ever created, every stitch infused with love and longing, and the terrible knowledge that she might only wear it once. The night of the ball, Somerset Hall transformed into something from a fairy story. The great hall blazed with candlelight, The long tables groaned with food, and the musicians filled the space with reels and waltzes. The staff and tenants arrived in their best clothes, eyes wide with wonder at the grandeur laid out for them. Gareth stood at the entrance to receive them, dressed in formal black that somehow made him look both more vital and more fragile. When Lily descended the main staircase in her blue gown, his expression stole her breath, wonder and desire and devastating tenderness all at once. "You're beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm.
"So are you,"
she replied, and meant it. He was beautiful in the way of autumn leaves just before they fall, bright and precious and heartbreakingly temporary. They opened the dancing together, and this time there was no pretense of propriety. He held her close as they waltzed, and she could feel every eye in the room upon them, could sense the whispers starting. Let them talk, she thought fiercely. Let them speculate and gossip and judge. This moment was theirs, and she would not diminish it with shame. "Are you happy?" Gareth asked as they turned across the floor. "Impossibly so," Lily said, and felt tears prick her eyes. "And impossibly sad. Both at once." "I know." His hand tightened at her waist. "I never thought I'd feel this again. Joy, hope, the desire to wake up each morning just to see what the day might bring." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You gave me that. In these final months, you gave me back my life." "And you gave me mine," she whispered back. "You made me believe I was worth more than just survival." The music swelled around them, and other couples joined the floor, the butler dancing with the head housekeeper, tenant farmers spinning their wives, young footmen blushing as they partnered with giggling maids. The great hall rang with laughter and music and the sound of people choosing joy despite hardship. It was, Lily thought, the most beautiful thing she'd ever witnessed, and the most heartbreaking. Later, when the dancing had wound down and the guests had moved to the tables for the feast, Gareth drew Lily aside into a quiet alcove. Baron followed, ever their faithful shadow. "I need to tell you something," Gareth said, reaching into his jacket. He withdrew a folded document, the contract, she realized, the one she'd signed months ago. "I'm releasing you from this." Lily's heart stuttered. "What? Why?" "Because nothing about our arrangement resembles what we agreed to in this contract. You came here as an employee, and you've become—" He paused, struggling with words. "Everything. You've become everything to me, Lily. And I won't have what we share reduced to a transaction. I won't have you wonder, even for a moment, if you stayed for the money." "I don't wonder that," she said fiercely. "I know why I stayed." "Then take the money freely, not as payment, but as a gift. As the means to secure your future when I'm—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Please, let me do this one thing that isn't tainted by the specter of duty or obligation." Lily took the contract with trembling hands. In the candlelight, she could see the careful script, the enormous sum that had once seemed like salvation. It meant nothing now. Less than nothing compared to what she'd found here. "I love you," she said, the words finally breaking free. "I love you more than money or security or any future I might build with it. I love you, and I would have stayed even without a single pound. You must know that." Gareth cupped her face in his hands, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I know. God help me, I know. And I love you so much it terrifies me. Because I have to leave you, Lily. In a matter of weeks, I have to leave you. And the thought of you grieving for me—" "Then don't think of it." She covered his hands with hers. "Think of this moment. This perfect, stolen moment. Let that be enough." He kissed her then, deep and desperate and achingly tender, pouring into it everything they couldn't say, everything the future wouldn't allow them to have. Baron whined softly at their feet, and from the great hall came the sound of music and laughter, life continuing, indifferent to their private tragedy. When they finally pulled apart, Gareth pressed his forehead to hers. "Take the money," he said hoarsely. "Please. Honor my original duty to you, even if everything else has changed. Build something beautiful with it. Live the life I won't get to see. Promise me." "I promise," Lily whispered, though the words felt like glass in her throat. "I'll build something beautiful, something that honors what we had." "What we have?" he corrected gently. "We still have a little time." They returned to the ball hand in hand and danced until the candles burned low and the musicians' fingers grew tired. The staff and tenants departed with full bellies and grateful hearts, whispering about the Duke's generosity and the mysterious woman who'd brought light back into his eyes. In the empty great hall, surrounded by the ruins of the feast, Lily and Gareth stood together in the dimming candlelight. Baron sat at their feet, his white fur golden in the glow. "One more month," Gareth said softly. "Then we'll make it count," Lily replied. And in the silence of Somerset Hall, the clock continued its relentless count toward an ending neither of them was ready to face. January came with snow that turned Somerset Hall into a palace of ice and silence. The world outside the windows seemed to hold its breath, waiting. And inside, Baron began to fade. It happened quickly, as these things sometimes do. One morning, the little dog simply couldn't rise from his bed by the fire. His breathing was labored, his eyes clouded with pain that no medicine could ease. When Lily arrived at the study, she found Gareth kneeling beside Baron's cushion, one hand resting on the dog's trembling body, his face a mask of anguish. "He won't eat," Gareth said without looking up. "Won't even take water. The veterinarian came at dawn. He said..." His voice broke. "Days. Perhaps only hours." Lily knelt beside him, her hand joining his on Baron's soft fur. The little dog's tail managed a weak thump of recognition, but the effort seemed to exhaust him. His breathing rattled in his small chest. "I'm not ready," Gareth whispered. "I know that's absurd. I knew this was coming. We've been counting down to it for months. But I'm not ready to lose him." "We're never ready to lose the ones we love," Lily said gently, "no matter how much warning we have." They sat with Baron through the morning, taking turns holding him, whispering comfort into his soft ears, the little dog who had been their bridge, their companion, their silent witness to everything that had grown between them. He was leaving first, and the grief of it was staggering. By afternoon, Gareth made a decision. "There's a field," he said, his voice rough from unshed tears, "on the western edge of the estate. It overlooks the valley, and in spring it's covered with wildflowers. Baron and I used to walk there every day before I stopped walking anywhere. I want to take him there, one last time. If he's going to leave us, let it be somewhere beautiful, somewhere he loved." "Can he manage the journey?" Lily asked carefully. "I'll carry him. It's not far, 15 minutes by the footpath. Please, Lily. I need to do this for him." They bundled Baron in a soft blanket, and Gareth lifted him with infinite care. The dog weighed almost nothing now, as if he were already becoming air and memory. Lily gathered her journal and pencils, though her hands shook at the thought of documenting this particular farewell. The walk through the snowy woods was silent, except for their footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. Gareth moved slowly, mindful of every step, cradling Baron against his chest. His breath came hard, his own health fragile enough that Lily worried about the exertion. But his expression was set with determination. The field, when they reached it, was breathtaking. Snow covered the ground in an unmarred blanket of white, and the valley stretched out below them, rolling hills fading into the distance under a pale winter sun. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only comes on the coldest days, sharp and clear and infinite. "Here," Gareth said, his voice breaking. "This is where we'd sit." He'd chase rabbits, never caught one, but he'd try. And then he'd come back and collapse beside me, panting and happy, and we'd just be together. He lowered himself carefully to the ground, settling with his back against an old oak tree. Lily sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Gareth arranged Baron on his lap, stroking the dog's head with trembling fingers. Baron's eyes opened, and for a moment something like recognition flickered there. His tail attempted one more weak wag. "Good boy," Gareth whispered. "Such a good, loyal boy. You stayed with me when I didn't deserve companionship. You loved me when I'd forgotten how to love myself. You were the best friend I ever had." Lily's vision blurred with tears. She opened her journal, but her hands were shaking too badly to draw. Instead, she simply watched, committing every detail to memory, the way the sunlight caught in Baron's white fur, the gentleness of Gareth's touch, the devastating intimacy of this goodbye. "I need to tell you something," Gareth said suddenly, looking at Lily. "Before he goes. I need to say it with him here because he's the reason I found you. The reason I was brave enough to let someone in again." He drew a shuddering breath. "I love you, Lily Maeve, completely, impossibly, in a way I never thought I'd love again. And I'm grateful, so grateful, that Baron got to see me happy one more time before the end." "I love you too," Lily whispered. "Both of you. So very much." Baron's breathing had grown more shallow, more labored. Gareth lifted him carefully, pressing a kiss to the top of the dog's head. Then, with a gentleness that broke Lily's heart, transferred him to her lap. "He's been sleeping in your room for weeks," Gareth said, his voice cracking. "He chose you as much as he chose me. Let him go with you, holding him. Please." Lily cradled the small, failing body against her chest, feeling the faint flutter of his heartbeat, the warmth of him, even as life began to slip away. She stroked his soft fur, murmuring nonsense words of comfort and love. "You're such a good boy, Baron," she whispered. "You brought us together. You taught a lonely Duke how to care again. You're the bravest little soul I've ever known." Baron's breathing slowed, became peaceful. His eyes closed. For a moment, Lily thought he might rally. There was a small sigh, an almost contented sound. And then, as gently as a candle flame extinguishing, he was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. Lily felt the exact moment Baron's spirit left, felt the weight in her arms become just a body, just fur and bones, without the animating force of love that had made him so much more. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot against the cold air. Beside her, Gareth made a sound like something breaking. Not a sob, but something deeper, a wrenching, primal grief that came from the very center of him. He buried his face in his hands, and his shoulders shook with the force of tears he'd been holding back for hours, days, years. Lily shifted Baron's body carefully, laying him on the blanket with profound tenderness, then turned to Gareth and wrapped her arms around him. He collapsed against her, and this time there was no hesitation. No remnant of the walls he'd built. He wept openly, desperately, like a man who'd finally been given permission to feel everything he'd been denying. "He was all I had," Gareth sobbed against her shoulder. "After Catherine and Anne, he was all I had. And now he's gone, and soon I'll be gone, and there will be nothing left of any of us." "No," Lily said fiercely, holding him tighter. "No, you're wrong. Baron mattered. He changed your life, changed mine. And you matter, Gareth. What we've built together matters. It doesn't disappear just because time is short. Love doesn't vanish just because the people who carry it are gone." "Then what's left?" he asked brokenly. "When we're all gone, what's left?" "The difference we made," Lily said. "The lives we touched. The kindness we showed. Every deed in that journal, every person we helped, that's what's left. That's the immortality that actually means something." Gareth pulled back enough to look at her, his face ravaged by grief, his eyes red and swollen. "I'm going to lose you too. In a matter of weeks. I'm going to lose you, and I don't know how to bear it." "Then don't think about losing me," Lily said, cupping his face in her hands. "Think about having me, right now, in this moment. We're here, Gareth. We're alive, and we have a little more time." He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of salt and sorrow and desperate love. Behind them, Baron lay peaceful in the snow, his suffering ended, his loyalty proven unto death. They sat together in that field until the sun began to set, holding each other while the world turned cold and the stars emerged one by one. When they finally rose, Gareth wrapped Baron's body carefully in the blanket, cradling him one last time. "We'll bury him in the rose garden," he said quietly, "next to Catherine and Anne. He belongs with family." "Yes," Lily agreed. "He does." They walked back through the darkening woods, and something had shifted between them. The last wall had fallen. There were no more defenses, no more careful distance. Just two people in love, facing the inevitable, choosing to be brave together for whatever time remained. In Lily's pocket, her journal remained blank, the farewell unrecorded in ink. But she knew she would never forget it. Some moments were too sacred for documentation. Some losses too profound for words. Some love too big for anything but memory. "My beautiful family, if Baron's loyalty just broke your heart the way it broke mine, then you understand why stories like this need to reach more people. This little dog stayed faithful until his last breath. Hit that subscribe button now. Show me that you cared so much about Baron and his loyalty. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that love, even when it's fleeting, is worth everything. Because if you don't share it, who will? And if no one shares it, stories like Gareth and Lily's die in silence. Don't let that happen. Hit like, subscribe, and let's continue to the devastating end together. Baron's death seemed to break something essential in Gareth, as if the little dog had been holding back a dam that now collapsed all at once. Within days of the burial, Gareth's health began its final, irreversible decline. The episodes came more frequently now, moments where his breath simply stopped working, where his heart raced and stumbled, where pain etched itself so deeply into his features that Lily had to look away to keep from weeping. The doctor came daily, his face growing graver with each visit, his medicines increasingly inadequate against the inevitable. They abandoned all pretense of propriety. Lily moved her things into the suite adjoining Gareth's chambers, sleeping on the settee so she could hear if he needed her in the night. More often than not, she woke to find him standing at her door, unable to sleep, seeking only her presence to ease the darkness. They stopped talking about deeds. The calendar lay forgotten on the desk, most of its tasks completed, a few left undone. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except the hours they had left. "Tell me about your mother," Gareth said one gray afternoon as they sat together by the fire in his sitting room. He was wrapped in blankets despite the warmth, his body unable to regulate temperature properly anymore. Lily sat close, her hand in his. So she told him about her mother's laugh, her skill with a needle, the lullabies she used to sing, about the way she died slowly, painfully, and how her father had followed her into death through sheer force of grief. "I used to think that was weakness," Lily said quietly, "that he should have stayed for us, his children. But now I understand. Some losses are simply too large to survive." "You'll survive mine," Gareth said, squeezing her hand weakly. "You're stronger than your father. Stronger than me. I don't feel strong. You are, though. You've held me together these past months. You've been my strength when I had none left." He shifted, turning to face her more fully. "Which is why I need to ask you for one final thing. The last deed. The most important one." Lily's throat tightened. "Anything." He rose with effort, moving to his desk, and retrieved a leather portfolio she had never seen before. Inside were papers covered in his handwriting, notes, dates, names, memories documented in his careful script. "I've been working on this in the hours when you sleep," he said, returning to sit beside her. "It's everything. My childhood, my parents, my marriage to Catherine, Anne's birth, the accident, the guilt, meeting you, barren, the deeds we completed together, all of it, written down as honestly as I could manage." Lily took the portfolio with trembling hands, scanning the pages. His life, laid bare in ink and vulnerability. "I don't want a marble monument," Gareth continued. "I don't want my name carved in stone in some cathedral where strangers will walk past without caring. I want something that matters. Something that tells the truth." He looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "I want you to take these words and transform them into thread. Create something beautiful from my broken story. A tapestry, an embroidered chronicle, I don't care what form it takes. Just make it real. Make it last." "Gareth," she whispered, overwhelmed. "That could take months, years." "I know. Which is why I'm trusting you to complete it after I'm gone." His hand found hers again, gripping with what little strength remained. "This is my final wish, Lily. Not just to document my life, but to have you immortalize it in the thing you do best, your gift, your art, applied to my story, our story. So that someday, long after we're both gone, someone might see it and know that we existed, that we loved, that our brief time together meant something." Tears streamed down Lily's face. "It's too much. To ask me to spend years stitching your memory while trying to live without you. I know." His own eyes were wet. "I know it's cruel. But I also know you need a purpose, something to pour your grief into. And I need to believe that some part of me will continue, will be kept safe in your hands and your art. Please, Lily. This is all I'll ever ask of you again." She looked at the portfolio, at the pages filled with his life, and understood what he was truly asking. Not just for a memorial, but for a way to keep him with her. A task that would ensure his presence in her daily life, in her work, in her thoughts. a reason to wake up each morning after he was gone.
Yes, she whispered. I'll create something beautiful. I promise.
The relief in his expression was profound. He pulled her close, and they sat entwined while the fire burned low and the winter afternoon faded into evening. The final week was a study in quiet intimacy. They spent hours simply talking about everything and nothing, about childhood memories and philosophical questions, about the nature of love and loss and legacy. Gareth grew weaker by the day, sleeping more, eating less, his body systematically shutting down. But his mind remained clear, and in those lucid moments, he spoke with a peace Lily had never heard from him before. "I'm not afraid anymore," he said one evening as she sat on the edge of his bed, holding his hand. "I was terrified for so long, of dying, of being forgotten, of having my life amount to nothing. But you've given me something I never expected. Meaning, purpose. The knowledge that I'll continue, in some form, through your work." "You would have continued anyway," Lily said, her voice thick with tears she was trying to hold back. "Through the people we helped, the deeds we completed. You've already built a legacy." "Perhaps. But this feels different. More personal. More true." He lifted his free hand to her face, his touch feather light. "Promise me you'll finish it. Even when it's hard. Even when the grief feels like it might drown you. Promise me you'll see it through." "I promise," she said. "Every stitch will be a prayer. Every thread will carry my love for you." "Then I can go peacefully." The words hung between them, acknowledgement of the end they'd been dancing around for months. Lily's composure finally broke, and she bent forward, pressing her forehead to his chest, feeling the irregular beat of his failing heart. "I don't want you to go," she sobbed. "I know that's selfish and childish, but I don't want you to leave me." "I don't want to leave you either." His hand stroked her hair with tender weakness. "But we don't get a choice in this, my love. We only get to choose how we say goodbye." She lifted her head, looking into his eyes. Those winter sea eyes that had been so cold when they first met and were now filled with such warmth, such love, such terrible goodbye. "Then let's not say it," she whispered. "Let's not use that word. Let's just be together, for whatever time is left." "Together," he agreed, "until the very end." She climbed carefully into the bed beside him, and he wrapped his arms around her with what little strength he had. They lay like that through the night, breathing in rhythm, hearts beating in synchrony, two souls intertwined against the approaching dark. "Lily," he whispered as dawn began to break. "Thank you for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For loving me when I thought I was unlovable. For giving me a reason to live my final months instead of just enduring them." "Thank you for trusting me," she whispered back. "For letting me in. For showing me that my worth wasn't just in what I could do, but in who I am." "Who you are is extraordinary," he said. "Never forget that." His breathing had become shallower, more labored. Lily knew, with a certainty that broke her heart, that these were their final hours. "I love you," she said, the words simple and infinite. "I will love you until I draw my last breath. And then I'll stitch that love into every fiber of your story, so it lasts long after we're both gone." "I love you too," Gareth breathed. "In this life and whatever comes after." The morning light grew stronger, spilling through the windows in golden streams. Somewhere in the house, servants were waking, beginning their daily routines, unaware that in this quiet room, a life was ending and a love was being sealed into eternity. Gareth's eyes closed. His breathing slowed, became peaceful. And Lily held him, whispering words of love and comfort, until the moment his chest rose one final time, and then was still. The silence that followed was absolute and infinite. Lily sat with him for a long time, memorizing the peace in his features, the way the morning light made him look almost young again, unburdened. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, cold now, but still beloved. "I'll keep my promise," she whispered. "I'll make something beautiful from our story. I'll make sure you're never forgotten." In the corner of the room, the leather portfolio waited. Pages filled with a life now ended, a story waiting to be transformed into art. And Lily knew, with absolute certainty, that her real work was only just beginning. The funeral was a somber affair, attended by members of the peerage who had barely spoken to Gareth in the 4 years since Catherine's death, but who appeared now to pay respects to a title rather than a man. Lily stood at the back of the chapel, wearing her simple gray dress, invisible among the servants and estate workers who had actually known the Duke, who had actually mourned him. Lord Alistair presided over the proceedings with cold efficiency, his pale eyes scanning the crowd as if cataloging assets and liabilities. When his gaze landed on Lily, she saw the calculation there, the threat. She was not surprised when, 2 days after the burial, she was summoned to the library for the reading of the will. The solicitor, the same watery-eyed man who had presented her original contract, sat at the great mahogany desk, Alistair positioned behind him like a sentinel. Several other relatives Lily had never met occupied the chairs, all wearing expressions of polite greed. "Miss Maeve," the solicitor acknowledged with a nod. "Please, sit." She took a chair near the door, hands folded in her lap, feeling the weight of hostile stares. The will itself was straightforward. The title and estate passed to Alistair as expected. Various bequests were made to distant relatives, longtime servants, and charitable organizations. And then, to Miss Lily Maeve, in recognition of services rendered and in gratitude for companionship freely given, I bequeath the sum of £500 as previously contracted, along with an additional bequest of £200 and lifetime tenancy of Rose Cottage on the estate grounds, should she choose to accept it. The room erupted. "This is outrageous," Alistair said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "A common seamstress given £700 and property?" My cousin was clearly not in his right mind when he made these provisions. "His Grace was of sound mind when this will was drafted," the solicitor said calmly. "I can attest to that personally. Furthermore," he withdrew a sealed letter from the portfolio before him. He left specific instructions regarding Miss Maeve's bequest. He broke the seal and read aloud in Gareth's unmistakable script. "To those who would question my final provisions for Miss Lily Maeve, I state clearly and without reservation that she performed her duties with absolute professionalism and integrity. She asked nothing of me beyond the original contract. The additional bequest and cottage are given freely, in recognition of extraordinary service and as provision for work yet to be completed on my behalf. Any attempt to contest these bequests will result in the immediate activation of Clause 17, which diverts the contested funds to charity and bars the challenger from estate grounds. I trust my wishes will be respected. Gareth Shaw, Duke of Somerset." The silence that followed was thunderous. Alistair's face had gone white with rage, but he was trapped. Challenge the bequest and lose access to the very estate he'd just inherited. "There is also this," the solicitor continued, handing Lily a smaller sealed envelope. to be opened privately. Lily took it with shaking hands, feeling Alistair's fury like heat across her skin. She stood, curtsied to the assembly, and left before anyone could speak. In the privacy of her quarters, soon to be vacated for Rose Cottage, she opened Gareth's final letter to her. My dearest Lily, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you are facing the aftermath alone. I'm sorry for that. Sorry for the suspicion you'll endure, the whispers, the judgment of people who could never understand what we shared. The cottage is yours, along with funds sufficient to live comfortably while you complete the work I asked of you. But there is one more thing, one final wish I couldn't bring myself to speak aloud, because it felt too large, too presumptuous. In the portfolio with my life story, you'll find documents establishing a trust. I want you to use Rose Cottage and the associated funds to create a school for girls like you once were. Poor, talented, deserving of opportunity, but denied it by circumstance. Teach them needlework, art, any skill that might lift them from poverty into purpose. Give them the chance I wish someone had given you. This is my true legacy, Lily. Not the title, not the estate, but the good we can do together even after I'm gone. You'll run the school, you'll teach, and in doing so, you'll prove that worth has nothing to do with birth and everything to do with what we create with our own hands. I love you. I will love you beyond death, beyond time, beyond any boundary this world might set. Finish the tapestry, build the school, live beautifully, always yours. Gareth Lily pressed the letter to her chest and wept for love, for loss, for the extraordinary gift he'd given her even in death. Not just money or property, but purpose, legacy, a way to transform grief into something that would outlive them both. The work began immediately. Rose Cottage was small but perfectly situated near the eastern gardens, with good light and enough rooms to serve as both home and workspace. Lily moved in with her few possessions and Gareth's portfolio, setting up her embroidery frame in the main room where sun streamed through tall windows. She started with fabric, the finest linen she could find, stretched taut and primed for thread. Then came the design, sketched carefully from Gareth's written memories. She would create a narrative tapestry, she decided, telling his story in sequential panels like a medieval chronicle. The first panel showed a young Gareth inheriting the title, the weight of responsibility evident in his posture. The second showed his marriage to Catherine, their joy rendered in golden threads. The third, the birth of Anne, tiny and perfect in her mother's arms. The fourth, the accident, the storm, the grief, worked in deep blues and grays and blacks that took her weeks to complete, each stitch a prayer for the dead. She worked through spring and into summer, her siblings visiting on Sundays, marveling at the scope of the project. Margaret had married a kind clerk, Thomas apprenticed to a carpenter, Beatrice enrolled in a proper school, all made possible by Gareth's gift. They were safe, secure, thriving. The burden Lily had carried for years had been lifted, replaced by a different kind of purpose. The tapestry grew. Panel by panel, Gareth's life emerged in silk and wool and cotton. His years of isolation worked in muted tones. Baron's arrival, a splash of white that brought warmth back to the narrative. And then, her own appearance, rendered as a small figure in gray, barely visible at first, but growing more prominent, more colorful as the story progressed. She stitched their deeds, the groundskeeper's debts forgiven, the child's doll restored, the ball in the great hall. She stitched Baron's death, the field of snow, the moment of letting go. And finally, the last panels, Gareth's final days, their love declared openly, his peaceful death rendered with such tenderness that visitors would weep when they saw it. But she didn't stop there. The final panel showed not an ending, but a beginning. Rose Cottage with its doors open, young women gathering to learn, to create, to build futures with their own hands. The legacy continuing, the love transforming into something lasting. It took 18 months to complete. When Lily finally stepped back from the finished work, she was 30 years old, her eyes tired from close work, her hands permanently stained with dye, her heart both broken and healed in ways she couldn't articulate. The tapestry was magnificent. 10 feet long, 6 feet high, worked in threads so fine that from a distance it looked like a painting. It told the truth, all of it. The joy and the sorrow and the impossible love that had bloomed in the shadow of death. She had it installed in the entrance hall of what was now officially the Somerset School for Young Women, established by trust and overseen by Lily herself. The first class of 12 girls, aged 14 to 18, all from poor families, all showing talent in needlework or art, had begun their studies that autumn. On the day of the school's official dedication, Lily stood before the tapestry with her students gathered around her. Some were already crying, moved by the story rendered in thread. "This," Lily said quietly, "is why we do what we do. This is why stitching matters, why art matters. Because it tells the truth when words fail. Because it preserves what would otherwise be lost to time. And because every thread you work carries meaning, carries your heart, carries the possibility of something lasting beyond your own brief life." A young girl, perhaps 15, raised her hand tentatively. "Miss Maeve, did you love him? The Duke?" Lily smiled, though tears pricked her eyes. "More than I thought it was possible to love. And he loved me too. Our time together was impossibly short, but it was real. And this," she gestured to the tapestry, "this makes it immortal." In the years that followed, the Somerset School became renowned throughout England. Young women arrived poor and left with skills that commanded respect and income. They became sought-after embroiderers, designers, artists. They married well or chose not to marry at all, secure in their ability to support themselves. They carried Lily's teaching with them, that worth was inherent, that art mattered, that love transformed everything it touched. Lily herself never remarried. She had loved once, completely, and that was enough. She poured her passion into teaching, into the school, into creating smaller works that were exhibited in galleries and purchased by collectors. But nothing ever matched the tapestry, the masterwork that hung in the entrance hall, telling the story of a duke and a seamstress and a small white dog who brought them together. On the 10th anniversary of Gareth's death, Lily stood before the tapestry at dawn when the school was quiet and she could be alone with her memories. She traced the stitched outline of his face with one finger, remembering the warmth of his hand in hers, the sound of his voice, the way he'd looked at her with such desperate love in those final days. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I made something beautiful. I gave girls the chances I never had. And I never forgot you. Not for a single day." The tapestry seemed to shimmer in the early light, and Lily could almost feel Gareth's presence beside her, proud, grateful, still loving her across the boundary of death. Her worth had been established forever, not by the poverty she'd escaped or the money she'd earned, but by the extraordinary love she'd stitched into the Duke's lasting memory, and by the legacy of hope she'd woven into the lives of hundreds of young women who would carry that love forward into a future neither she nor Gareth would see. Some loves, she had learned, were too big for one lifetime. Some loves were meant to be immortal. My lovely family, Lily spent 18 months stitching Gareth's memory into immortality. You can honor their story in just 3 seconds. Hit that like button if this tale of love, loss, and legacy moved you. Subscribe because there are more stories like this. Stories of people who loved impossibly, sacrificed everything, and left legacies that mattered. And please, share this video. Because somewhere out there is someone who's grieving, someone who thinks their brief time with a loved one didn't matter. Someone who needs to know that love doesn't need forever to be real. Be the reason they find this story. Like, subscribe, share. That's how we keep stories like Gareth and Lily's alive. That's how we prove that love, even when it ends, never truly dies. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another powerful story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by even more unforgettable emotions with love. The Victorian Royal Stories team.